If you do it once, that's okay. Do it twice, maybe more than that, let Photoshop do it for you. Hello my friends, Stefan Bollinger here. I hope you're doing well. Today we're talking about automation in Photoshop, just to make your life a little bit easier. Actually, not just today. We'll do it today and tomorrow and on Sunday. So 3 days of goodies this week. Now, before we get there, how about if you like what I do, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you always get notifications when a new episode is out, and maybe, like it, or even better, leave a comment. I read them all. So, be nice. Let me know what you think. Anyway, let's jump into Photoshop and have some fun. And in case you don't care about automation or actions at all, you can just dive into the absolute mesmerizing eyes of Alina. Isn't that just, so beautiful. Anyway, all right, so what do we need for our actions? First of all, we need an actions panel, and you find that under Windows, Actions. Here we go. And I'll just dock this here to the side for now. Usually I work on 2 different screens, so I have all my tools, all my panels on one screen, and on the main screen I just have the photo that I work with. But for this tutorial, we cram it all in. Your action panel might look a little bit different. It might look something like this. This is the list view, and that's the view that we use to create our actions. However, once the action is done, I personally prefer to have it in button mode. So I just have one button that I can click and bang, everything happens, and I don't see all the steps in between. The layout will change depending on the size you have. So if you make it smaller, you get single buttons. If you make it a little bit bigger, you get 2 rows. If you go further, you get 3, 4, 5 until it's absolute chaos. So I like it like this personally, but you can do it however you want. And also mark the colors of those buttons. This is something that you can set when you create your action. So when you create your action, pick a color that you believe makes sense. And that way you can group these just like I have here, color modes. These are sort of things that in my mind belong together, so they all got this orange color. All right, let's go back to our list view and create our first action. At the bottom of your actions panel, you see those icons, and if you click on the plus, then it will ask you for the name of your action. Since we want to create a dodge and burn action, well, that's what we call it. And below you have set. And you can create several sets of actions. Every set contains of, I don't know how many actions that you create. And you can save, backup, or share those sets with actions. So let's say you have a main machine that you're working on, but you also want the same actions on your laptop. Or if you have a gazillion different actions, it makes sense to put them into different sets so that you can load, enable, or disable them within the actions panel, just to stay organized. Below, you can set the function key together with modifier keys if you want to trigger this action with keyboard shortcuts. And as I just mentioned, you can give your action a color. For now, let's just give it the color red, and we say record. From now on, Photoshop will record every single thing that we do. Now, it is super important to mention that naming of what we do is essential. Photoshop, when it runs the action, will refer to those names. So if we create a new layer, if we create a new adjustment layer, whatever it may be, when we jump around within actions, Photoshop will look for that layer name. So be careful how you name things, because in this case, we're lucky we just have a background layer, so we're not going to run into trouble. However, if this would be a file with a lot of retouching done to it already, we might already have a layer that is called layer 1 or layer 2, which then would possibly create conflicts when we try to run our actions. All right, so what do we need for our dodge and burn action. We need two curves adjustment layers. So let's create these. In the layers palette, you find curves here. And before we do anything else, we rename this straight away. Now come up with something that you most probably don't use ever before and after in your layer stacks. I usually use my initials and then an A for action, an underscore, and then whatever it actually does. So in this case, I call it Dodge. I do the same for the second layer, for our burn layer. I go into curves. Again, before I do anything else, I name it. And now that that's done, I can easily jump to another layer. Now let's pause here for a second. I click on the stop icon to end the recording or stop the recording. So what we can see is Photoshop created our layer. It then changed the name to SPA Dodge. We then created another layer, again renamed it. And as I said before, it looks for the name. It now selected the layer SPA Dodge. That's because even though we created the burn layer, I then clicked on the Dodge layer and Photoshop recorded this and going by the name. So if you would not name this properly, it may select the wrong layer or you just get an error message. Now, if we want to continue to record, it is important where we are in our list. So make sure if you want to continue to record that you select the last step. Otherwise, it will fill in wherever you were. All right, so we selected our last step. I click on record and we're back in business. I go into my curve here. If you don't know what curves are doing, well, you have the black point here. You can lift it up. And as you can see, we're removing the black parts of the photo. On the top right, we have the white areas. We can push this and of course, then it will be terribly overblown. And we have all the gradients in between. If you don't have the black areas on the bottom left and the highlights or the whites on the top right, you can go into this flyout menu, curve display options. In here, you can switch between light and pigment. If you go pigment, it's the opposite way around. So the lighter parts or the whites will be in the bottom left. I prefer to work with lights. It's just how histograms generally work, that on the left side we have the black areas and on the right side we have the highlights. So this is something that I'm just used to. Now the other thing is you see this grid in here. This is also something that you can change. If you hold the Option key and you click on it, you see that the grid changes from smaller grid to a bigger grid. I personally prefer the smaller grid, but you can do this however you like. And it also has no influence in what the curves adjustment actually does. It's just for reference. So we are on the Dodge layer. So what we want to do is we grab the center and we move it a little bit towards the left, which means we are brightening up the page. Now I want to hide what I've just done. So the layer mask at the moment is white. That means it reveals. I select the layer mask and I hit Command I, which inverts that layer mask to black. So it is hidden. And we do the same with the burn layer. I set a point in the center and move it a little bit towards the right, which darkens our image. And I select the layer mask, Command I to invert it. And that way we have our Dodge and our burn layer. Now I hold the Shift key to select both of them. And I hold the Shift key again and click the folder icon, which puts both of those adjustment layers into this group. And as you would guess it, I would instantly rename this group. Name it whatever you want, but make sure it's a unique name. So what would we need to now actually apply Dodge and Burn? I always integrate the tool that I use also in the action. So I will need a brush. So I'll go and select a brush and then I'll select the burn layer. I'll make sure that the foreground is white. I will hit the letter D for default, which will put white as a foreground and black as a background. So we are set to go. And that's the moment when I stop my recording. So now all those steps have been done. So let's try it out. So let's take this group and throw it away. And we go to our dodge and burn action and hit the play button. Happened so quick, and here we are. We have our group, our burn, and our dodge layer. We already have white as a foreground selected. The brush has been selected for us. So we would just take the brush, make it soft, and maybe at 10% or so, we would start to brush in where we want to burn it. So at the moment, we're at 10%, which doesn't do much. So let's say we set it to 40%, just for demonstration purposes to be a little bit stronger. So there you go. I now switch to the dodge layer. In this case, I'll take my opacity down a little bit here and maybe just a little here. So it doesn't seem like we've done much until we switch that layer off. This is before, this is after, before and after. Now, the beautiful thing of putting this into a group is that we can now take the opacity down and fade it in just as much as we like. So maybe 60% or so. So that creates some beautiful additional depth. And it was all done with one click. Of course, there's manual labor involved because every picture is different, but the preparation is all done for us in one go. And how will that look like in button mode? Here we go, red and boldened, ready to go. Now, I did not record the 12% or 15% or 10% strength of my brush. Shouldn't we integrate that into our action as well? Well, in general, you can always add to actions if you want. You would just get out of button mode. You would go to the end of your actions list and you would hit record. Here's a gotcha, however. Some things are not recorded. So even though we are in record mode, if I now use my number keys to change the opacity, if I push 1, it sets the opacity to 10%. If I hit 4, it sets it to 40%, 7, 70%, 0, 100%. So I pushed 1, 4, 7, and 0, yet in our actions panel, it did not record that at all. Don't ask me why, that's just how it is. So if you create an action and for some reason something is not recorded, maybe that is one of those exceptions. Most things work great, certain things don't. So let's go to a different photo. Bye, Alina. That's been nice. Here we have a photo of an awesome door. I love the structure, the textures and everything. I took this photo in India, which is just amazing in terms of colors and structures and everything. So what if we would take our dodge and burn action one step further and have Photoshop do the dodge and burn for us? Well, let's try that one out. So let's create a new action. We give that also a red color and we call this Auto Dodge and Burn. Now here's another gotcha for you. We are creating this action with only one background layer and no additional layers. If we would have, however, several layers, there would be one step required, and that is to create a merged layer that contains all the retouches or all the adjustments that we've made. There is a keyboard shortcut pretty much holding every key on your keyboard, which is Command, Option, Shift, and E. If I push this right now, nothing happens because there are no layers. So this function doesn't work. To be sure that our action works in any kind of scenario, no matter what lies beneath, if it's one layer or 1,000, I would always recommend to build in that step. So to do so, let's stop the action or let's stop the recording and create some layers. Now we actually have a layer stack. So now that function, Command, Option, Shift, and E works. Let's go back to our recording, record, and we create another empty layer and we give this a name. Remember, always name it when you work with actions. I just use my initials plus the A for action, and I call this original composite. I give the layer a color. I usually use red if I shouldn't touch it, and I hit OK. Now that we have this new layer, we can use this crazy keyboard shortcut. Command, Option, Shift, and E, which creates a composite of all the layers below. From now on, no matter what the layer stack looks like, we do have this composite. Or do we? Let's stop and try it out. Let's delete this and let's see what happens if we would not be on the topmost layer, but down here. Let's start our action. And you see the problem. The action always starts on top of whatever layer is selected. So it's not just important that we name our actions correctly, but it's also important where in the hierarchy of our layers we are. So how do we fix this? Well, let's delete this and let's just kill those 2 steps in our action and start again. Let's record. Yet again, we create a new layer. We give that our name. Again, I give it my red color. Now, before I do anything else, I want to make sure that this layer jumps to the very top. Now, I can't use any keyboard shortcuts or move this up with my mouse because I don't know how many layers I will have in a future photo. I will go into the Layers menu, go to Arrange, and select Bring to Front. This will jump it to the very top, no matter how many groups, layers, adjustment layers, whatever I have. It now is definitely and automatically at the very top. This is the moment when we can now use this crazy keyboard shortcut of Command, Option, Shift, and E, and we are sure that we are now working on top of our layer stack. So let's create our automatic dodge and burn. We go to Select, Color Range, and we select Shadows. You can play around with this. I usually use these values because it's an automated process and every photo is a little bit different anyway. So I use 15 and 30 and I say OK. So now we created a selection. Now we have to do something with this selection. Create a curves adjustment layer just like we did before. Remember, we selected the shadows. So that means this will be our burn layer. And the beautiful thing is it didn't just create the curves adjustment layer, but it also created the mask based on our selection. Before we do anything else, as always, we name this. I go back to our composite and I'll do the same thing again for the highlights. I go into Select, Color Range, and this time I select the highlights. And again, I'll create a curves adjustment layer. And again, I name it. So let's do the same as we did before. We're currently on the dodge layer. So I lift the highlights up a little bit and I go into the burn layer and I darken down those a little bit. Let's throw one more in. Why not? Because we're having fun. Select our original composite again. I'll go to Select, Color Range. This time I pick the midtones. We don't want them to feel left out. And I create a vibrance layer, push the vibrance up a little bit. And I want this layer to be at the very top. Should we move it? No, we have to name it. And now I want this to be at the very top. Again, I go into Layer, Arrange, Bring to Front. And now I select this whole stack. Hold the Shift key, click on the group icon, name this whole thing. And now I can kill the original composite that we used to create all those layers, and I'll stop my action. Let's delete this whole group. Let's go to any layer, background layer, doesn't matter wherever we are, and here are all our changes. And we start our action. Bam, it's done. It's nicely on top, it's nicely named, and we have our automatic dodge and burn done for us. It adds a nice amount of additional oomph. However, there's still two things that we should have done if we then want to use this on all the other images. We should exclude the absolute highlights and exclude the absolute shadows. Well, the beautiful thing is that we can always go back into our actions and refine them further. So let's go to our last step that we've done. Hit the record button again, and now we select our burn layer, double click it to open the layer style, and then we go down to the blend if slider. This allows us to blend in that effect based on either the layer itself that we're on or whatever is below it. So we are currently on the burn layer. That means we want to exclude the absolute blacks. Now you see those sliders here that we can move around. The best way to deal with these is not to use them as one slider, but to hold the Option key and split them somewhere around the 50 mark, 50, 60 mark, somewhere here. Then that means between the blacks and somewhere in the dark gray areas, it will slowly start to fade in. So not affect the absolute blacks, but gradually fade in. Wonderful. Now we select our dodge layer. We double click the empty space behind it again to open our blending options. And we do the same thing. We hold the Option key and we fade it in. So the absolute whites are not affected, but it gradually fades in. And we hit stop. So let's throw this action away and see if it actually works. Let's go to the start of our action again and hit play. And there you go. Now we have our stack created nicely on top, nicely named, and those blending options have been added as well. So let's have a look at the photo itself and see what happened. That's before, that's after. Nice. And of course, we can go in and refine those layer masks further, or even better, we just select our group and again, fade it in as much as we want. I actually like it at 80%. That's before and that's after. And if you just want one or the other, well, duh, you just switch the dodge layer off or the burn layer off or your vibrance off. Does that action work on other photos? Let's pick another photo here. This is the absolutely gorgeous Stevie. We took this photo in Soho in New York. So let's run that action. Bam. Before, after. It definitely gives us a good amount of extra depth. So why don't we just take it a step further? We hold the Option key down as we are on the group and hit the layer mask icon. This means that all those changes are hidden. I'll take a white brush and I just brush it in. And within 20 seconds, we have dodged and burned this baby. Switch it off. Let's zoom in and have a look what happens before and after. Is it as effective as it would be if we would do this by hand? No, but it takes one click and bam, it's done. So let's create one more action for today, and then I think we leave the rest for tomorrow. Let's create a new action here. We call this whiten teeth, and we give it a yellow color. To Stevie's defense, her teeth are absolutely perfect. However, when we shot this was already late afternoon, so there is this yellow tone in the picture. So it's not her teeth, it is the photo. Nevertheless, let's change this. What we want to do is again make sure that we are in the right spot. So we now have this stack that we've just created. What do we need to change a color? Use the hue and saturation adjustment layer. In this case, luckily, it was right on top. but it could have been somewhere else if the background layer would have been selected. So let's make sure we take that into consideration. Stop the action, we throw those two away and start from scratch. So let's say we select somewhere inside, wherever it may be, maybe even somewhere inside of a group. Doesn't matter where it is, as long as we're not right on top. And let's create our action here to make sure that it will work no matter what. So let's begin our recording. And again, we go in and we create our hue and saturation adjustment layer, which, as you can see, is now sitting right here in the middle of the stack. Definitely not where we want it. So remember, going to Layer, Arrange, Bring to Front. Now, as you can see, it moved it up within this stack, but it didn't move it out of the group. So we have to do this again. We go to Layer, Arrange, Bring to Front. And now it is definitely on top. Now, if you have groups within groups within groups within groups, well, okay, you have to move it by yourself. But do it twice, and in 99% of the cases, you are then in the right spot. So before we do anything else, again, name this baby. And now we go into our properties for the hue and saturation. Pick the yellows. I usually put it to -35 and give it an extra lightness of 10. Again, I'll grab the brush and select the layer mask, invert it, Command I, and I'll stop my action. Let's see if that actually works. Let's throw this away. Let's select the background in this case. We run our action and bam, we have our layer with a black layer mask, so the effect is hidden. Now all we have to do is make our brush a little bit smaller, zoom in a little bit, and we brush over it. And as by magic, those teeth are less yellow. Now, I don't overdo these things because it starts to look fake real quick. But if you switch that on and off, you see that it does have quite an effect. That's before and that's after, before and after. With just those two adjustments, this is before and this is after. This is definitely not something I would do to a delicate retouch like this photo would require, but it's a very quick and easy way to do things. So let's have a look at yet another photo. This is a photo I've taken in Kuala Lumpur. And why don't we apply our automatic dodge and burn to this image just to see what happens. Play. Bam. That's before. That's after. And because all of these are on separate layers, I think the dodge layer is a little bit too strong. So maybe I just take this down to about 30-40%. And it gave it a nice little oomph to a picture that I actually liked how it was before. But now I like it even better. Well, that was step number 1 or day number 1 of actions. We created quite a few, 3 of them. And let's go back to our button mode. And we have our dodge and burn in red. And we have our auto dodge and burn in red next to it, as they should be, they belong together. And the yellow teeth, white teeth automation right there as well. All right, play with it and have fun. Well, there you go. I hope that was a little bit helpful, and I see you again tomorrow with more fun in Photoshop. See you then.